This is the Gaming Buzz Podcast, where ranting about video games somehow equals content.
Hello and welcome to episode, 59 of the Gaming Buzz Show that we don't really call the Gaming Buzz Show.
There's a lot of
intro.
episodes. I'm butting in for Christian.
Yep. This is episode 59. We're pretty sure of that. Right, Jason?
It's 59.
We took a little break for the past couple weeks from doing this show. Jason's been busy.
I have.
It's just not Gaming Buzz without Jason.
I know. I'm the good one.
Yes. And as you can see, Darien's here from the Turbo Button Show usually, right?
Yeah.
You're filling in for Christian because, honestly, Christian just doesn't want to really talk about this topic. And it's a more technical discussion.
This stuff makes me like,
I don't want to know what that emotion represents.
Take it as it is. You're probably right.
All right, so you may know this by the title already, but we're going to be talking about video game storage mediums. We're talking about the storage wars. And specifically, we're talking everything retro. We're going to go right up from the beginning of time up to the PlayStation today. Spoilers.
So basically like 1950s to like
1995.
Yep. So that's
And then
40 years-ish.
Next week, we'll be going from 1995, 96-ish to the modern day. And to make sure you don't miss that one, you should subscribe, right?
Right.
Yeah. Subscribe so you don't... Jason, do you subscribe?
I do.
All right. See, Jason knows what's up. And like he said earlier, he's the good one. So we're going to just roll right into it because we actually recorded this once before and there were technical difficulties.
They were Jacob's fault.
They were.
Everyone says they're my fault.
It really was. See, when Christian and I set up, it's always perfect.
So we're just going to get right into this because I want to get this one done. It's a cool episode, but we don't want to take 1,000 years. So we're going to begin with the oldest format, which is...
Punch cards.
Punch cards. Jason didn't say punch cards right after me, and that makes me sad. It's like
Didn't have to.
Okay. So punch cards, if you don't know, they were pieces of paper. Yes, we're kind of stretching it a little because not very many games were ever put on punch card.
No.
But it was really the first method for storing data long term.
Yeah.
Theoretically, you could put a game on it, but they'd be incredibly simple.
You would need, if you were put a modern game, you'd need billions of these things.
And actually, the first punch cards were from the early 1900s using basic calculating machines that were all mechanical, not using any like circuits or logic boards.
It's always cool when they do that. Also, here's a fun fact about punch cards, is from modern gaming, patches get the name because if you needed to patch a program, you'd put a little piece of tape.
You actually patch it like you patch a pair of jeans, so there wouldn't be a hole there anymore, so that data could not be read. Smart.
It's a cool thing. We keep names.
So let's see.
Also, this is not related to punch cards, but it's kind of. But bug also comes from the fact when we had wide open like drums for our data, and the bugs would actually get into it, so it'd cause a problem.
All right.
So
punch cards were not a standard thing like a lot of these other formats we're going to be talking about, or were derived from one company or one standard. There are thousands of different punch card varieties that held different amounts of data, or there were reels of punch that weren't necessarily cards, more like toilet paper.
they were like big strips, like they'd go for miles sometimes.
The one we're going to reference most is the generally the standard academic one used a lot by machines like the Altair.
Kind of funny thing is they're actually kind of the size of a Nintendo Switch case.
And how much data did they hold? The standard size one, I believe, it was the IBM format.
8 bytes.
Yeah.
8 bytes. Yeah. 8 bytes.
And they took up a space of the Nintendo Switch cartridge is almost the exact.
That's
size.
per card.
Yeah, per card. That's
8 bytes.
That's,
We'll get into how tiny that is
that's like
later.
like that's like a single letter.
So clearly, with the invention of video game consoles, beginning with the Atari 2600, the Magnavox Odyssey, stuff like that, and the rise of personal computers, we needed something better than punch cards. So why don't we
Yeah.
go into the first big solution used on the personal computer side? Because for a long time, these were two separate entities. Personal computers had their own formats, and game consoles had their own formats. And it wasn't till about where we end this episode that they started merging.
You can't forget mainframes.
Yes.
They also had their own.
So what
isn't
is the
that-
first big home computer format?
This next format wasn't much better than the punch cards, though. Lasted about as long. It's the cassettes.
Cassettes.
They're trying to copy reel-to-reel machines.
Yep.
So benefits of cassettes, incredibly cheap. Like, you want to talk cheap? They were cheap. You could buy full video games for your ZX Spectrum or your Commodore 64 for like $2.
But hey, they're super easy to pirate.
They were incredibly easy to pirate,
And you could rewind them.
and you could rewind it. Yep.
Put them in your boombox and get screeching.
If you've never had the, I really don't want to say pleasure of loading a game on a cassette, it is the most excruciating process ever. Hope that you have one of those computers that uses a fast loading drive that basically runs a cassette through from beginning to end at just slightly under the speed that they'd start on fire to load them quicker. Or else you're looking at 20 to 30 minute load times to load at max, 2 megabytes of data.
Yep, approximately.
And if you have anything wrong, if a part of the cassette is bad or there's a little dust inside it or the volume on your cassette drive is slightly off, it'll get 80% done and then just say, "Mount, you got to start again." That's not a fun era of gaming, is it?
It was not.
I've
Especially
got-
things, the majority of that was the Commodore.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Especially over here.
I got to have a recent going with the Commodore 64 with a disk drive or a cassette tape drive. It was miserable, but it was that one buggy game. I forgot what it is. Super good. It's one of the best Commodore games, but
There are a lot of good Commodore games, honestly.
the load times ruins it though.
Yes. So clearly something had to be changed. I
Right.
mean, the benefit of them being cheap was great, and piracy in some ways was great because it really helped fuel the market. But people really started to get sick of it, and so what they did for the next big format for personal computers was they looked towards and thanks for reminding me, Darien, towards mainframes. Mainframes were using these magnetic discs in giant. Like caddies, and they called them floppy disks, and they were big. They were like 7 7/8 inches.
The original ones were about the size of a vinyl record.
Yeah. So they were with time and with better innovation miniaturized, and we'll use that in quotes. Miniaturized
Yeah, every technology actually gets smaller and smaller. Just think about it.
to the 5 1/4 inch floppy drive. This thing, which don't worry, I'm gonna be rough with this disc. This disc is already dead, which brings up a con. These things die incredibly easily. Get a little dust on them, they're dead. Touch right here, they're dead.
A little bit
Static.
of scratch.
Little bit of a scratch, a little static electricity, they're dead.
Just leave
Store
the-
them in a room with a little bit of moisture, they're dead. Store them in a freezer or a cool, dry place, they're dead. Talk to them wrong on a Wednesday, they're dead.
Or just think about this: stored in a room for 20 years, they're dead.
So this one is this disc comes from a Apple II. This is Where in the USA is Carmen Sandiego.
Which is disappointing because that's the style of game I grew up with that on.
Unfortunately, this one died due to our dear friend water damage. Actually, I have here at the office, we've got like 2 totes full of dead floppy drives that got rain due to a situation I won't go into that have just destroyed all of them.
It makes me cry every day.
Yeah. But for the time, this was a pretty good format. So it was slightly more expensive actually quite a bit more expensive than cassette, and honestly held about the same data, if not less, right?
Right.
But one benefit, speed.
They were faster, but they didn't hold very much. They definitely didn't hold as much as their smaller counterpart.
And once again, there are some derivatives. There are some weird ones that hold weird amounts, but what was the general standard, Darien?
I don't remember that size of floppy. We don't have it. We don't. We have its smaller, younger brother.
Typically, there were like 660 kilobytes per side, which came out, and depending on what system you were using them on and how they read their sectors, they could get up to almost like 1.5 megabytes for a double-sided disc. Though plenty of systems only use single-sided discs, especially older ones. This is a double-sided disc.
Yeah, it has 2 holes.
Anything else to say about this format? Jason, did you ever have to use one of these?
I did. It's actually when I started playing with computers, that's where I started, was the floppy disks.
I love these things.
My favorite part is the noise that they make in the drive. The not that one.
Oh,
the
no.
little.
I like the initialization noise. The
The next one isn't much different.
Nope.
I don't think it needs a lot of introduction, but it was the 3.5.
Has a nice little
Originally
flap.
used for the very first, not necessarily laptops, but portable computers. They needed something a little more rugged. And these are still called floppy disks, even though
They're rigid.
they're rigid. They're hard plastic.
I don't know if it's a brag, but I have an original floppy drive in a compact workstation from 2000 that still works. The belts.
There are still computers and things today that still use that style disc.
So this is one of my favorite formats, like ever. Size, not much of an increase. Dual-sided discs were almost always standardized to 1.44 megabytes. So honestly, about the same size as this disc, right?
Yeah.
But a lot smaller, a little bit cheaper.
A little more reliable.
A little? Try a lot. Holy cow. I mean, they do have issues, especially ones made really late into the life of just dying on you, but they're much more resilient. And one of the things that helps is they have this little spring-loaded mechanism that hides the naked disc, so it's not exposed to nature, and it makes fun noises. Let me do this right into the microphone. Welcome to our ASMR video game floppy disk.
That's too loud for ASMR.
Probably, yeah. But altogether, a really solid format and used far longer than pretty much anything we're talking about today.
Our nuclear codes are stored on one.
No, they're stored on the big ones.
Oh, yeah.
The 7 and 7/8 inch drives. The ones that make this one go, I'm so tiny.
You could eat dinner on it if you put 4 little dowels underneath it.
All right, so what's next?
It should be noted that moving on, there are 1 or 2 systems before the Atari that came out that did a writable like disc, almost like the TurboGrafx, and then put that concept into a cartridge. Atari's just one that made it popular, and happens to be the one we're going to start with.
So I actually totally forgot to ask Jason to bring some Atari in. Whoops.
He was supposed to give me a list. He gave me a list. One of them was not the Atari.
Yeah, I completely forgot about the 2600. I'm sorry. So why don't you cover it, since I clearly don't know enough and I forgot. Even though it's on my list of notes, I forgot to just mention it to you today.
The Atari 2600 was just a small, squarish, almost like the Genesis game he has.
It's about...
But even slightly smaller.
Right.
They were simple.
They only carried a max size of like 4 kilobytes and were incredibly simple.
So to put that into perspective, you could fit like 250 of them on one of these.
The thing is a lot of great games were on the Atari 2600. There's Pitfall 2, which is one of the...
Frogger, Pong.
Pit.
The Atari version of Pac-Man, right? Right? E.T.?
Yep.
We don't
Yeah,
want to think about that.
Yeah, if you would have told me, you would have had a copy of ET here.
The homebrew scene is still pretty big.
Yeah. It was a landmark system, and we don't really have time to go over all the great things the Atari 2600 did, but, I mean, it was pretty small cartridge size.
There's just a note that the Odyssey and the Fairchild kind of paved the way for it. Fairchild being the first one to use the cartridge the way that Atari did.
To be clear, we won't be covering every single format ever. We're going to skip the ColecoVision and the Intellivision because they're very similar to the Atari 2600 in how they worked. So we're going to cover a lot of the big ones, or some of the unique ones.
Moving on, I think you have it over there.
What's next? Well, let's talk about the one that saved the video game industry, at least in the United States.
Japan had it strong no matter what you look at.
So did Europe. Europe had their home micros. They were still loading their games on their cartridge or on their cassettes. So
miserable people.
This is an NES cartridge. Famicom cartridges are not nearly this big. It's a lot of empty space.
It's to resemble a VCR tape. That's what they were going for.
But holy cow, is this an iconic look? I love it.
And it's,
not gonna lie, like I love this design.
If you grew up in the 80s and the 90s, that's what you grew up with.
I've talked about a few times how, despite the fact that, you know, I wasn't born until 96, I grew up with these things because my grandmother had one. And blowing in cartridges, man. Right?
Which is not the recommended way to...
No, it is not.
You'll
Did that
corrode
hurt me doing that, Jason?
It will corrode your contacts at some point.
Did that hurt you that I just did that?
A little.
2 megabytes of space.
So 2 megabytes max, yeah. Quite a substantial jump from, you know, the Ataris of old. But still, only 2 megs.
It's a big leap, though, from 4 kilobytes to 2 megabytes. That's enormous.
But the amount of stuff they were able to condense onto the 2 megabytes compared to the floppy drive, though.
Mm-hmm.
Super Mario Brothers 3. Holy crap! How the heck?
I think
do that?
now's time for a disclaimer. I did the best I could with research. There are going to be a couple systems in this list where we're guessing, or we're just going off of information I've pulled and gathered from other fans of certain systems. And there will also be the exceptions. There are even NES games in the homebrew market that have gone over 2 megabytes using something called bank switching. So theoretically, you can get more, but 2 megs is really the max.
For official stuff.
And even for most homebrew. All right, so what's next?
What about
Genesis?
Yeah, what about Genesis?
Yeah, let's just keep going. So I think we'll do a few more of these cartridge-based systems and then move on to some of the handhelds because they get unique too. I've got a Genesis cartridge here. I picked the best one. This is a Bubsy.
What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong with this episode? One really cool thing Sega did was they allowed companies, there's third-party developers, to create their own cartridges and their own like designs. Like, this is not a normal Sega.
It is not. Normal Sega cartridge is like 32X, which you'll see shortly.
Yes. And I have written down 5 megabytes as the maximum size in our notes. There's some debate on that, whether it's 5 or 3 or 2, but generally it's somewhere between 3 and 5 without using cheats.
Right.
Okay. What about 32X? You know, that's a nice segue. Let's go. We didn't organize this the best. Let's just go through all the Sega stuff. Finish that off.
Oh, there's only one more of those. So.
2 more, right?
Oh, yeah. You have 2.
Yeah.
The 32X cartridge is about the size of a standard Genesis cartridge.
Here, pass this over. See if you can compare.
I mean, Accolade made theirs a little bit larger.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It was a little bit taller rather than a little bit longer. The 32X was about 4 megabytes of space in general and required you to have an attachment to your Genesis to play.
It was like a tumor.
So I said let's finish off Sega. Now let's save the other one. Because we're prepared and we're not indecisive. How about Nintendo's counterpart to the Genesis. You know, the Genesis was a 16-bit console. How did Nintendo respond? They responded with this.
1990, they were like, hey, guess what?
This is a Super Nintendo cartridge. Jason, how many hours have you logged playing Super Nintendo games?
Actually, surprisingly, not as much as you would think.
Really?
Yeah. Thing with the Super Nintendo, Genesis was out and actually taking market share away from Nintendo.
Some argue even that they won the 16-bit era.
Nintendo wasn't even going to release another system, and then they were losing so much market share they had to, and that's where we got the Super.
Yes.
Which turned out to be even almost more iconic than the actual Nintendo, just with the games they released.
And this one is special. It's a Super FX cartridge, which means it's got extra chips in it that can help do a lot of things, including some rudimentary 3D graphics.
Yep. I think
Stunt Race FX.
very underrated, but I wouldn't recommend it to people who are not a big fan of
The frame rate.
Yeah.
So how about that storage space?
6 megabytes.
There's some debate with that too, but we're just going to say 6 megs. Trust us. Let's go through the other competitor, the one that everyone forgets from the 16-bit era.
Because it has a retarded shape.
The TurboGrafx 16.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Did you forget?
I was trying to follow the list down, and you don't have it on here. So
Yeah, sorry.
So TurboGrafx is just a little chip.
So they're called the Hue cards. I don't remember what they call them, like turbo chips in the West, but they're Hue cards.
They came in a cute little box
Basically like a CD case.
with a little plastic holder for it.
Just as a fun fact, their format, the Hue card, is very similar to a format used by Sega. Sega also used one. I forget what they called them, but it was included and used on the Master System, but not very well used in the West.
Right.
But so the reason that's not on there is I spent almost an hour trying to find any information whatsoever on the actual storage capabilities of a Hue card, and I couldn't find anything. If I had to guess, it's obviously not as much as a cartridge of the time. I mean, they're so thin and tiny. I mean, it's basically like a credit card, right?
Right.
I'd probably guess like 1 to 2 megs. Do you think that's fair?
I'd give it at least 3 to 4.
I don't know. It's one of those things that's a little more. Jason's just.
Yeah, I got the book. I'll figure it out while they go on to the next one or last one.
What is the last one?
The Jaguar.
The Jaguar. You're gonna.
I'll let you do
pass
that while
that over?
Yeah, while I search for this.
Okay, so the Jaguar is, I believe, the last home console cartridge-based one we're talking about today. This cartridge, first of all, it's not a 16-bit console; it's a 64-bit console, which has to be the most debated thing, like in all of video gaming ever, whether or not
32 plus 32.
Yes.
bit.
It's a whole bunch of random processors thrown into a machine together, blended together between 16-bit, a 24-bit bus, some 32-bit processors. No one has any idea what the deal is with the Jaguar.
It's a bit system.
It's a bit system. And it's all Atari's often credited at destroying the bit wars. You know, everyone advertising with the bits, because they're like, it's the first 64-bit console. And everyone's like, that's a BS.
And then people are like,
Maybe bits don't matter.
then we get into the systems where it's like 128-bit, and then it drops down to 32-bit and then 64-bit.
The only one who didn't get the memo after Atari ruined the bit wars was Nintendo. But we'll get to that. Actually, that will be in the next episode. But these cartridges, as Jason was referring to earlier, they're stupid. They're curved. Have you ever held one of these?
Well, I can now. I passed it to you, but like
But you never really looked at it?
has a little handle.
So
So
I actually really like the handle, especially since the Atari Jaguar was one of those consoles that like really held on to your games and you had to pull with force.
that PCB in there is thick.
I have to say, there are some really nice things about the Jaguar, and I'd love to travel to an alternate dimension where it was a success, but it was so hard for developers to program for.
It was their last system.
And of all the consoles and whatnot that their storage mediums, I have answers for how big they could hold. This one was the most confusing. So it uses this weird form of compression that, from what I understand, it's only used on the Atari Jaguar. That theoretically could allow it up to 84 megabytes worth of storage.
Right.
But also, in reality, it's not. So on the actual PCB inside this, it has spots for up to 32 megabytes of information, which is really quite a bit. Nintendo didn't hit that number till like 1998, 1999. This was in 1993 and 4.
Wow.
But in reality, most like homebrew designers for the Jaguar agree that without bank switching, the maximum you can actually use is like 24. But also there are more, more asterisks to that, and more, well, you can only do that if you do this. And really, it's like 8-ish, maybe. Just like everything else with the Jaguar, no one knows, and it's such a weird oddity. Any luck over there, Jason?
Nope.
All right, so we're going to say some data on the TurboGrafx 16. If you know, let me know.
Yeah, let us know.
Let us know, please. And maybe if you let us know before we got the next one, we'll give you a shout out or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Who knows? Okay, so what's next? Handhelds?
We could go with PS1.
Well, I think we should save that one till last.
Yeah, I think we're going.
Yeah.
I think we're going for next week. At this point.
Really? You think so? We got handhelds yet.
The 90s handheld.
Let's cover these in rapid succession. Game Boy. How much?
512.
Yep.
512 kilobytes. Exceptions to the rule. Once again, particularly with Pokemon games, but just assume
512 to 2 megs.
You should know what a Game Boy game is. Next.
Decent battery life on that compared to the next one, which is Game Gear, which is 512.
Yes. And actually had color way before.
Pretty impressive games, too.
Game Gear is a neat system.
Was a battery hog.
Yes. Speaking of battery hogs, probably the most obscure one we got here. Right?
The Mega Man?
No.
Which one?
The other system that you got there. The little tiny super thin one.
Oh,
yes. Did you almost forget?
Yeah, I did. The Atari Lynx.
Once again, Atari. Really interesting system.
Was even worse of a battery hog than the Game Gear was.
Had some really impressive games on it, though.
I think the only thing that could beat this was Sega's Nomad.
Yes, and the Nomad lasts like an hour.
2 hours, yeah.
Yeah. But I like the Lynx. I kind of wish I owned one.
We don't know how much it holds because it's kind of a mystery.
All right, do we have any other systems before we move on to the final one for the day? No, I think that's everything, right?
It doesn't look like we do.
All right, last thing. If you're watching this channel, you've like 99.99% used one of these, right?
All right.
Unless you're really young. This is what we call a PlayStation game. And this is the game that I chose to represent this entire era because this is the start of standardization.
Right.
So with the PlayStation, it's not the only system that used these. Can we get a quick rapid-fire list of systems that used CD-ROM technology or just CDs?
PCs.
PCs, they did eventually move to this, though. It actually took a couple years for them to really get off of these things.
Yeah. PS2, 360.
No, those use DVDs.
No, I suppose.
Well, the PS2 had a lot of CD printed.
It did,
games.
yeah. So let's see, what else? There's the Saturn.
Yep, the Saturn.
The PC Engine CD, the Sega CD.
Yes.
Nope. That's another one we'll get into next time. There's the 3DO. I'm surprised you didn't bring up the 3DO. You love the 3DO, right?
I do. Don't have a lot on it right now,
No.
but yeah, I love my 3DO.
Yeah, but there were a lot of things that use this. And music CDs.
Yeah.
And they're compact discs. This one's black. Sony used black discs because why not? Whereas everyone else used more like, the traditional like rainbow colory thing.
Yeah. The Spectrum breakers.
Yeah.
Then those ones we get up to 660 megabytes, but there are some like CDs where like you can write like 700 megabytes of data on them.
Particularly later CDs.
That's basically your basic CDR nowadays, CDRWs and stuff. But the original CDs with the technology, 660 is their safe spot.
Yeah. And that was the killer app for the PlayStation. Like, its graphics, its 3D processing, not that great, right?
But they had a
sound
lot
quality,
of content.
pretty decent. But here's the big thing. You could fit so much. I mean, the biggest competitor for the PlayStation, no, it's not the Saturn, it was the N64. And we'll get to it. But this thing can hold 6 times the maximum any N64 game. Or not 6 times, 10 times the max any N64 game ever held.
So if somebody designed a game from a size standpoint and was using MIDI music on both systems, the PlayStation, you could put a lot more content and the same music. Like the N64 version would necessarily not have as much content.
This format of the CD changed everything, and we'll talk more about some of those effects next week. So, like we mentioned earlier, subscribe. Make sure you don't miss our episode next week when we cover the rise of the DVD and beyond. Woohoo. So comment below. Let us know if you know anything about these formats. Did I mess up with any of my research? Let us know if you've ever used one of these. And
Like a goose.
yeah, I know. Wow. Like this video and visit our shop. Jason, you like our shop, right? We've got a shop.
I do. I'm just poor, so I can't buy anything right now.
Well, maybe they should buy things so you can not be poor.
Right.
www.gamingbuzz.com/shop.
So you're not naked.
Thanks, Darien. Anything else?
Wear your clothes, everybody.
Bye.
Did you like that? Of course you did. You can get more at gamingbuzz.com. Let us know what else you want by connecting with us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube.